Yo, what up everyone? Today I got another opinion piece video for you guys. This time I want to talk about the state of solo gameplay in Hunt Showdown. Usually I do this at the end of the video, but I want to start with it this time. I know this video will have mixed feelings and reactions to it, and I would appreciate if everyone will stay respectful in the comment section. It is okay to disagree with my opinion or the opinions of others, but there is no reason to insult each other. This video has the purpose to start a discussion and not to fight each other. Okay, now that this has been said, this video will be cut into 4 parts. I'm gonna talk about the current state of solo, the history of solo gameplay, the downsides and why solo needed to be nerfed, and a conclusion part with solutions how to make solo gameplay more enjoyable again. For everyone who strongly dislikes solos and doesn't want them to be viable again, I highly recommend to watch the downsides of old Necromancer part, since it might allow some people to understand what the actual issue with old Necro was, and it definitely wasn't the ability to revive multiple times. First, I want to talk about the current state of solos. In this video I will mostly talk about the solo vs trios experience, but it also applies to solo vs duos in most cases. This is the engine upgrade, and slightly before that, solo has gotten a bunch of changes, which has made solo gameplay much more challenging than it used to be. First of all, Necromancer has been changed to a burn rate, which disappears after a singular use, which does mean solos only have one opportunity to come back into a match. You will get all your bars restored, but you can no longer revive multiple times. You can't own multiple stacks of Necromancer. You can find the trait in-game and reacquire it once you used your Necromancer, but that scenario is very unlikely and happens barely ever. Also, before the engine upgrade last year, in August, we have gotten changes to the MMR system, which also made sure that solo players fight against players of their skill level, or very close to it. Which means, for players like me, if I queue up solo, that most of my enemies will be 6-star as well, and it isn't rare that the entire lobby is filled with 6-star players, including myself. This applies to every rank and not only to 6-stars, so a 4-star plays against mostly 4-star players, a 5-star against mostly 5-star players. This might be fair, and I personally really don't mind it, but it most definitely made playing solo much more challenging, since if you're playing against players of your own skill level, it is quite likely that a team of 3 is able to win against you, if they play their cards correctly. Both of those changes, separately, seem like good changes to me, but once combined you can see how this does cause a very frustrating scenario. You're fighting against teams that are equal to you in skill, while having one singular chance to come back into the match. This, first of all, is very demotivating to play the game actively, aka trying to make plays, engaging in close quarter combat, since you have to be extremely careful with your one charge of Necromancer. But also motivates you to reset the match once you have lost Necromancer, since there's not really a point for you to continue the match if you lose your Necromancer stack in a spawn fight, for example. Basically, these changes highly punish active gameplay, which has more risk to it to begin with, while highly promoting playing passive and stealthy. I might make the argument that the only efficient way to play solo currently, aka you wanna win the most amount of times, is being a sniper rat, and go for extraction kills or third-party ambushes. I know some people might say that this is what Hunt Showdown should be like, but at the end of the day, it isn't fun to be forced into a playstyle. Or at least feeling like the game is telling you to play a certain way, and being forced to play a certain playstyle is the number one complaint I hear when people talk about nerfing camping. AKA when I go on Reddit, I tell them I would like people to play more Shift W, they instantly go like, nobody owes your playstyle. Not everybody has to play Shift W. Well, this is kinda the reverse version of that. Basically people telling the solo player they should camp even though the solo player doesn't want to camp. So while this is different, it is basically the same thing. Solos are forced to play extremely stealthy, which is fun for some people or fun for a few matches, but very unenjoyable for a lot of players and gets kinda boring if you do it for a long time. And this ends up at a point at which some players don't even want to bother with solos anymore at all. They basically just stop playing solo. Other people might say, but solo used to not be able to revive at all. And that is true. For example, I used to play solo back in the days before Solo Necromancer was introduced. And first of all, there weren't a lot of solo players to begin with. And second of all, the game was completely different back then. And a lot of mechanics and weapons didn't exist or were much easier to deal with because they weren't buffed yet. To name a few mechanics that come to my mind: bullet drop, surefoot, spam and medium slot shotguns being buffed, and recovery shots or restoration mechanics being in the game almost permanently. While I have nothing against those changes at all, aka I don't mind bullet drop or other changes, and actually do like them, I think they all make the life of a solo significantly harder. It does make the life harder for everybody, but solos get hit twice as hard. For example, bullet drop automatically forces fights to happen at closer distances, while before, when running for example a shotgun in combination with an uppercut allowed you to get an entry kill at 100 meters, has turned into something quite unrealistic to do, aka hitting the very first shot at medium to long distances has become significantly harder, which I personally think is great, but as a solo player the first shot is the most important one, because once people know where you are, you kinda wanna like thin out the enemy team as fast as possible. And when the fight basically starts at 50 meters instead of at 100 meters, the enemy team has a much easier time to simply play the numbers and trade kills. Surefoot, spammy rifles and medium slot shotguns being buffed, like the Cyclone for example, are additions I do like, but they also made fights much faster than they were ever before. Suddenly fights are happening at closer ranges, medium shotguns have become much more lethal, and spam rifles have become more meta. All this makes the life of a solo player even harder, since only one mistake can easily end up with you dying, and losing your one revive is the worst case scenario. On top of that, especially since the engine upgrade, Crytek has, especially during the events, increased the total amounts of possibilities to regain your health chunks by adding restoration medkits, burn traits being more available all over the map, and wild targets having a 100% spawn rate even outside of events, and on top of that we got recovery shots in the game now. All of those restoration changes are great changes, and I think the game needed it, but solos do not benefit from them at all. Suddenly, even getting a kill on an enemy can be meaningless if you don't deny the revive, since they will most likely run a recovery shot. Meanwhile, you as a solo player, you lose your Necromancer and that's it. Killing a boss doesn't do anything. Using a recovery shot doesn't do anything. Using Remedy, basically pointless. You can see how the game is much different today than it was a few years ago. And it should be. The game is better nowadays. But pretending solos having only one chance to revive is fine is a little bit questionable. Or at least you can see why a lot of players have stopped playing solo for now. Even content creators like Ragda, Nino, Wombus or me myself have significantly cut down on the time we play solo. I, for myself for example, used to play solo 3 to 4 times, sometimes even more, per week. And now I play it once or twice at max, because it has become incredibly frustrating at times. And when even some of the most skilled solo content creators struggle playing solo, how is it realistic to expect the normal casual players to even remotely enjoy it? If the expectation is to either play the perfect game with 0 mistakes, aka you never die, and win against up to 11 players who are just as good as you are, or you have to play like a rat and go for 1 or 2 kills while somebody is looting, extracting or third partying a fight. The odds are highly stacked against solos, they always have been, but currently solos are in the worst state they have ever been since the introduction of Solo Necromancer. If we go back in time, the development team has over the years motivated players to give solo a try by adding Solo Necromancer in the first place, having a heavy impact MMR modifier, aka solos fighting against slightly worse opponents, sometimes significantly worse opponents, and other trait changes for solos, like for example Magpie providing 10 seconds of dark side. All this made a lot of players give solo a try, and they enjoyed it. Sadly, with the engine upgrade, the development team has decided to do a complete 180 swap on their stance on solo gameplay, and basically ruined it for the majority of the player base, aka they are not having fun anymore. It might be more fair now, some people might argue, because solos should be challenging, but from a pure fun perspective, solos are basically not what they used to be, not what the player base was introduced to, and definitely not what they fell in love with. And I'm not saying the old system did not have issues, but Crytek did the classic nerf it to the ground strategy, aka applying every nerf they can come up with at once. They have done this with so many mechanics or items in the game, for example the flash grenade. Also, even though self-revive was a mechanic everyone was complaining about, I honestly do believe that solo necromancer was never an issue. Solo gameplay had severe problems, but if you and your friends died to a solo that revived right in front of you, then it was more of a you guys not paying attention than self-revive being overpowered. Since that guy was laying on the floor, went through an animation with a sound cue, and you guys didn't manage to kill him again. In gamer terms, we would call it a skill issue. I have to admit, in some cases this skill issue was artificially created, and I will explain what I mean with that in a little bit. And I do agree that there were cases during which the old necromancer was quite annoying to deal with. For example, the solo sniper who sits at 200 meters, and even if you down them, he revives and is gone by the time you try to catch him or you get at the position where you downed him. The real issue with solo was the time it took to take a solo out of the game, aka the old burn rates, and the lack of options to burn, and the old MMR system, which often made very experienced players fight against less experienced players. Basically smurfing. The self-revive was more of a symptom of a flawed system than the actual issue, but let me explain. Once you downed a solo player, it was quite annoying to take them out, since burning a player took a long time, and especially in combination with self-skin, and the solo reviving multiple times could take minutes to get rid of a solo player before the engine upgrade, which could often end up with you getting third-partied while making sure the solo is not coming back, since you did make noise, or made you miss out on catching a bounty for the sake of fully eliminating a solo. This problem was basically solved with the drastic changes to burn rates with the engine upgrade. Some people really didn't like the burn rate speed increases, but that is a different topic. On top of that, I'm gonna come back to the artificial skill issue I talked about earlier. The biggest problem with solo used to be the old MMR system, which was developed at a time at which solo necromancer wasn't even in the game yet. This means scenarios in which a player would die multiple times during a match were pretty rare and didn't have to be considered when designing the system. Especially players dying to low MMR players multiple times per match was basically unheard of. But with the introduction of solo necromancer, it was not that uncommon. To explain it a bit further, these numbers aren't accurate but make things easier to explain. On the old system, you would get, for example, 20 MMR points for downing an enemy off your skill bracket and lose 20 MMR points for being downed. This means if you down more hunters than you die, you gain overall MMR and climb in the higher elo ranks. If you on average die as often as you down someone, you would maintain your MMR, and if you die more often than you down enemy hunters, you'd lose MMR. Pretty simple, the system does make sense, right? Since on the old MMR system, with the old matchmaking system, you would on average fight against players who were roughly your skill level. This all would happen very slowly, and unless somebody overperformed and, for example, over the span of 3 or 4 games would on average down 5 to 10 hunters before they get downed, and on the old system it was usually game over if you died once or twice per match. Let's be honest, how often do you win a fight in which you get revived twice or even get revived once? The problem that the devs created was that first of all, solos would on average play against half to an entire elo bracket below them due to heavy modifiers, and on top of that they would lose a lot of MMR for being downed even when they are down bars already, aka The first time they die they are full HP, and every time they revive, since they are missing health chunks, the likelihood of them dying again significantly increased. As an example, let's say when a solo dies to a player that is lower MMR than they are, they lose about 30 MMR, and for killing an enemy hunter they only gain 10, since that's the expected outcome. They shouldn't get a lot of MMR for killing less skilled opponents. It's not as simple as that, but you get the idea. Basically, unless you overperformed with an average KD of at least 3, or maybe at least above a 2, you'd automatically would lose MMR long term, even when you were technically winning and extracting with bounties, since bounties extractions are not calculated in the MMR at all. It's all about killing and being downed, all about KD. My best example for that would be that I once had a match in which I got 12 kills and extracted with a double bounty. But because I died to a 3-star multiple times in that match, I died overall 4 times, because I revived multiple times, who was playing with their 6-star friends, I suddenly dropped from 6 to 5 stars on the old system, because I probably lost like 100 plus MMR in that one match. Even though I didn't even lose, I came out of that match successfully. So the issue with the old system was that it was never adjusted for self-revives. Like, there was no adjustment made to attribute the addition of solo revives. Some huge content creators and other scumbags even abused that system to simply press self-revive 5 times in a row to drastically lower the MMR. If you ever wondered why some of the solo heroes back then were playing loadouts like double hand crossbow with Dragon Breath, or only playing a baseball bat or a katana, then you kinda see how they managed to do that, but that is a different topic. Overall, unless you overperformed as a solo, you basically slowly but surely would drop MMR. And that is the artificial skill issue I talked about earlier. Suddenly, the very experienced players would get into matches with players who in worst case scenario just started playing a few weeks ago. All of a sudden the 6-star player with thousands of hours in experience was in a lobby full of 2 and 3 stars and completely dominating the lobby. And that is why to some people solo revive felt so overpowered, and is what they complained about. The issue wasn't the solo revive, but that they basically fought against smurfs and did not have the experience to realize that they are fighting a solo, and then got outplayed by it due to the lack of experience. For example, an experienced player would have an easy time spotting a solo by counting the amount of enemies they are fighting, and even in a multi-team server fight, and with a few educated guesses, they would figure out that a solo player is involved in the fight. For example, they are fighting 4 players, one team plays together, one guy plays by himself, they down the guy that plays by themselves. Maybe let's start burning him and see if that guy comes back from the dead. But a 3-star player, whose heart rate elevates at the sound of an enemy gunshot, who barely knows the compounds or how the game works in general, does not have the experience yet to realize they are fighting a solo or the knowledge how to deal with them. They are so overwhelmed with Hunt Showdown, which is a very intense game, very complicated game, a very hardcore game that has a very high skill ceiling. And that is when solo revive felt overpowered. They just finished the fight, thought it was over, are starting to calm down again, looting bodies, maybe celebrating their victory, and boom. Suddenly they get shot in the back by a solo who they downed just a few seconds ago, because they forgot about them. Or they didn't even realize that there was a solo involved in the fight at all, since they are just glad that nobody is shooting at them anymore. Everybody is dead, and they believe the fight is over. Sadly, like I mentioned earlier, Crytek did too many nerfs at once, like they usually do, and have turned solo into what it is now. I think increasing the burn speed like they did and the MMR adjustment that they have done would have been more than fine. I don't fully know how the new MMR system works yet, but it is significantly more stable, and I myself haven't left the 6-star bracket once since the MMR changes. Which again I think is fair, and I probably would agree that I should never derank out of 6 stars because that's the elo bracket where I should be at. But only one singular revive against 11 players who are as good as me, while they can revive and restore their bars multiple times within one match, seems a little bit unfair. More unfair than playing 1 against the entire server is already. And now we're gonna talk about potential changes. Like you probably can guess, I personally do believe they could give us the old Necromancer back, for teams and solos equally. Since I do believe that Necromancer being a burn trait only makes everyone play more passive, since dying has a higher impact on the match. Not being able to revive your teammate when they died on a roof makes people not go on the roof in the first place, makes people not engage into a fight. Pretty simple, right? Not having multiple Necromancers makes a solo not leave the bush, makes a solo not push, because they don't want to lose their Necromancer, because they know it's probably over if they die once. The result is people play more passive, and I think a lot of us have seen that recently. Basically, Necromancer was removed to reduce stalemates, or at least that was the developer's intention, but it backfired big time and it's the direct opposite in my opinion. I know we will probably never get Necromancer back, but I personally do believe it would be fine. There are multiple solutions on how to fix solo Necromancer within the community, and I want to tell you about my favorite 3. And Crytek, I'm not saying we need all of them, but maybe one of the many ideas that are floating around in the community would be pretty nice. First of all, I want to combine 2 ideas in one. How about Necromancer not burning like a burn trait, but it becoming not usable until you recharge it by performing an action in the game, or maybe recharging after 2 or 3 minutes. Currently, after losing Necromancer early into the match, I'm highly inclined to reset and rebuy Necromancer, since my motivation to take risk got taken away from me. And even though I don't care about losing my Hunter, I kinda like to be rewarded for continuing the match, like a team is, for example. Since a team can continue after a spawn fight and go kill a boss, go kill a wild target, or just use recovery shots to basically be as good as new and continue the match. As a solo, I lose Necromancer and boom, it's gone, that's it. Maybe I get lucky and find Necromancer, but that is quite unlikely. But how about solos, and maybe also teams, being able to recharge their Necromancer by killing or looting dead enemy hunters? Especially the looting part would also discourage from the insta-burning meta that we are currently having. Or by performing a restoration, aka banishing a boss, using a burn trait like Remedy, or the restoration medkit during events, or a recovery shot maybe. This would allow solos and teams to regain the ability to use Necromancer, but not for free. You have to do something to regain it. You actually have to be active in the match. You could also add a Necromancer charge to retaliation, aka downing and looting the hunter who killed you as a Necromancer refill. I think most of us can agree that would be a nice little compromise. This way solos get to refill the Necromancer, and honestly also teams, because why not? But you have to take a little bit more risk for that luxury of having another chance to revive yourself. The second idea I hear often and would be easily executable is to allow us to stack Necromancer up to 3 times like we can do with so many other burn traits. Ideally it shouldn't take 3 slots, but that would be nice for all the burn traits, to save more space. But being able to buy 3 Necromancers would kinda be nice, and again you don't get 3 charges for free. It would be 12 trade points. We could even increase the price. Which on a fresh hunter would be a strategic decision to buy 2 Necromancer charges instead of other trades that might help you. At the end of the day, I generally do believe that Crytek needs to buff solo gameplay, and they themselves do know that. Otherwise we wouldn't have gotten changes like the silent crouching in combination with Lightfoot for solos, which was probably one of the worst ideas I've ever seen. But it does show that they know, like we do, that solos does need help in some kind of way, and I really hope it will be some kind of version of buffing Necromancer. They sadly seem terrified to allow solos to revive multiple times again, but honestly that is all that is needed, since you guys fixed the actual issues, which was the MMR system, D-ranking and the burn rates. That was a great change, by the way, just to point that out, since people often say we are too negative. That was amazing. But That was it for the video. Let me know what you guys think, and don't forget to be respectful to each other in the comment section. Have a good one, thank you for watching, and I'll talk to you guys next time.